All right, what is up, everybody? I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day. This is I don't even remember what number iteration of our podcast, Darren, but Darren and I obviously do these podcasts and rotate, trying to put them out on a weekly basis. How are you doing today, Darren?
I'm pretty good. I think it's the seventh one, but I don't know for sure.
So lucky number 7, right? Yeah, but interested to be here today. I mean, there's been so much stuff going on over the past week. I saw that video from Christine Lagarde. She was at this educational institute, and she was talking about kind of that crypto is basically worth nothing, et cetera, et cetera. And unless you have your eyes wide open in this space, not to invest. But then the interviewer actually pulls up the chart of the bank balance sheet for the European Central Bank, basically being in a gigantic bubble. So I wanted to kind of touch base on when assets increase within these banking institutions, central banks, what occurs in the markets. And we've got a good number of charts put up. We've got the China Central Bank, European Central Bank. We've got the Bank of England. We've got the Fed. And Darren, maybe walk us through this, because it's a fascinating subject. You're probably much more enlightened than I am to talk about kind of what's going on in the global economy.
So this guy Dharma Trade posted this chart, and it just basically shows every time the Fed adds assets to their balance sheet, the markets actually pump. And then the reverse is opposite. So when there's tightening, when they decrease their assets, all markets dump. So there's this tight correlation between the central bank's balance sheet and just what the market's doing. If you kind of like overlay this to SPY or Bitcoin, you could clearly see as money is added to the balance sheet of the Fed or whatever central bank, the indices react accordingly. And I mean, it's no secret that during the 2020 crash, they've announced that they were buying junk bonds. They announced that they were buying indices. So there's this direct correlation. The environment that we're headed in is commodity prices have gone up due to sanctions and the war that's happening. So it's really on the supply side, and what the central banks are saying they want to do is crush demand, and they're doing that by raising interest rates and selling off what's on their balance sheet. And eventually, the markets sell off with what they're doing, and then people spend less if it costs more to borrow. If you're a business and you're not going to take on a loan that's expensive, right? If you don't have to. So the economy contracts. The other thing is the banks stop lending when it becomes really risky environment. Banks stop lending because it costs them too much in case you fail, right? So they're very careful on how they make loans. So this all bleeds into economic activity, and it just sort of gets tapered down quite a bit. So what I think is going to happen is at one point something's going to break in these systems. The credit market freezes. We see a significant crash with equities, or the bond market sells off. And when that happens, the Fed will have no choice but to step in to make sure that the markets don't freeze. The other part is they have two mandates. So one of them is a stable currency, and the other one is jobs. So if you look at a chart of jobs right now, jobs have unemployment has reached its lowest, but now it's starting to curve back up. And with economic activity being crushed, the jobs report is going to be correlated to with what stocks and everything else. When it starts crashing, there's going to be less and less jobs, and that's going to put the Fed into a position where they're going to have to start loosening monetary policy. And as we saw with the first chart, it's very clear that when they add to their balance sheet, when they lower interest rates, the markets start to move upwards. So loose monetary policy means that our asset prices become higher.
So what do you said something's got to give. It seems like the bow is going to break in one way or another. In your opinion, I mean, we can look at these, we can look at kind of where we're at right now. The one thing I will say before I lead into that question, the guy that was interviewing Christine Lagarde says, how do you sleep at night? We're looking at this. And she basically just says, I have to sleep. There's no other choice. a solution's coming, and the guy's like, what's the solution? She's like, it's coming. But a lot of fear, and I think I guess the question for me is, twofold. How would it affect crypto being a, looked at as a high risk asset in the short term, and how bad could it get globally as far as what we're looking at with the economy and just individuals, quality of life, et cetera, et cetera. How bad can it get from where we're at now?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? Is how much pain can happen before they reverse course with everything? It's what I think would be some type of emergency. The credit markets crashing, or unemployment spikes like an absurd number, because inflation is pretty high, and they're going to have a lot of political pressure to be put on them to try to fix inflation, right? And the only tools they really have is to buy and sell. There's not much they can do for what's going on. It's mostly commodity prices that are taking off. Now, I mean, Bitcoin has held up relatively well compared to some of the more riskier tech stocks and everything. If you look at like Arc Innovation, it's really taken quite a hit. There's other tech stocks that dropped 99%, 90%. They really got hammered. And Bitcoin, on the other hand, has stayed in this $20,000, $30,000 range. Now, it wouldn't surprise me to see some type of freeze happen in the global economy, right? And that would be like that 2020 wick that we see there, something like that. And then the Fed reverses course, the central banks reverse course and start printing money again. And then we go again with all of this, because there's going to be a lot of problems. This whole system is just built on cheap, easy money. When you take that away, that's the problem. Is when you take it away, everything's like, how many jobs are associated with just cheap, easy money? If you look at like how many realtors there are, the housing market's in a bubble because of cheap, easy money, because interest rates are very low. If you look at like used car sales, auto sales, it's 0% interest on a lot of these different types of loans. And of course, that's going to spur activity. Now, when you take that away and just abruptly take it away, people aren't going to be able to sell. Then they lose their houses. Then people aren't able to produce, and they're going to lose their income. So it's going to really take a damper on everything. So some of the problems with the credit market is if banks don't want to take on that risk and they just stop lending completely, that freeze in economic activity would be devastating. So they would have to print it and prop it up. The same goes for the bond market. So as interest rates rise, what that means is bonds are selling off. There's an inverse correlation with bonds to yields, right? So the bond market can't sell off, right? It's kind of like the backbone of the economy, right? So if the bond market abruptly sells off and yields spike, the yields would stop all economic activity, and that would tell me that the Fed's going to have to get into the bond market and start buying up bonds to try to prop it up. And it's just a bad scenario for any which way you go with this. It's a bad scenario, but I'm leaning more towards inflation than deflation. In the short term, I see deflation, right? Because they're going to try to fight inflation and cause everything to sell off, and that's going to stop economic output. But eventually they're going to print, and it's going to be high inflation again.
Yep. No. Oh, it'll be interesting. I know you and I have talked about this multiple times, and I think there's a lot of different factors in play across the board, from traditional economy, and then even with digital assets. And I think that both of us have stated that we wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of pain potentially in the short term, but it's very clear to see where they're going as far as kind of that medium term, as far as this pivot into digital assets in this kind of ecosystem that you and I talk about on a daily basis. First and foremost within that, this came out, I believe, yesterday or the day before. You look at some of these nations, like Nigeria is going to be launching a major crypto initiative in intellectual property exchange marketplace and wallet that looks like it's going to be pretty much solely incorporating Algorand through this partnership with Developing Africa Group and Koi Banks. And this is pretty much running the gamut here as far as IP rights to trade, sell, exchange, etc. And I think down here it talked about patents. It talked about pretty much everything, right, Darren?
Yeah, all the intellectual property. So podcasts, videos, lyrics, songs, you're able to, trademark it with the Algorand blockchain. And it looks like the whole national infrastructure is going to work off of this. So that's pretty promising for Algorand.
Yep, and it's a 3-year exclusive intellectual property rights agreement with Developing Africa Group, and you can see the Developing Africa Group chose Koi Banks with the government's approval as a tokenization and payments engine, and Koi Banks certainly utilizes Algorand. So moving forward within this, kind of piggybacking on the European Central Bank aspects, this came out yesterday, and this is on top of, we're not sharing the Bank for International Settlements. Bank for International Settlements put out like 3 or 4 really crazy documents last week, like back to back, and kind of expect European Central Bank and some other banking institutions to kind of put some information out. Not a ton in this, but talking about financial stability risks in crypto given the growth, and then also talking about this market being a global market, and therefore a global issue, global coordination of regulatory measures being necessary. And maybe we do see more of a shift towards that. I personally think that a lot of this stuff has probably been flushed out behind the scenes over the past handful of years, more than likely, but they're just not announcing how they're going to regulate and kind of roll out that solution or whatever from a regulatory standpoint. I don't know what your opinion is on that, Darren. It's certainly not a surprise to them, where this market goes, because they're all building on top of it or integrating with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they have some type of blueprint that they've written out, and they have like a contingency plan for all of this. And what's difficult is this is like international regulation, so it's difficult for all the governments to come together and agree on something. But this goes back into my first point with the balance sheets and everything. So if you count the derivatives, the equities, everything that's related to blockchain, right, we're looking at like a $10 trillion market cap just with crypto and blockchain, and just the ETFs involved, and derivatives and futures and everything that's going on. So what they're concerned about right now is some type of stable coin failure, right? Because they don't know what banks are involved with crypto. They don't know who holds stable coins, who made loans to some of these big crypto companies. Let's just say, for example, if a bank loaned Tether a bunch of money and then they default on that money, that could be systemic, and that could be the catalyst that drops the whole market, right? So I think they have that blueprint in place, and if something urgent comes up, then you'll see it carried out quickly at that point.
Yeah, and I think even dealing with derivatives, like, as far as if you add everything up right now, but then even eventually down the road with the volumes that are potentially going to be flowing and integrating through potentially crypto down the road. I know that we know the DTCC is building out, and we know how much volume flows through them. And it's, what was it like in 2020? It was like $1.8 quadrillion worth of volume or something like that. So they need to make sure that, and even we've seen that we've seen a couple of different things as far as how there's integration. We've seen kind of that DTCC basically stating parallel rails, but then you have the Bank for International Settlements last week coming out on how to regulate, where they're talking about, do we regulate for the traditional system and then the parallel rails of DLT, and then they actually went and they nixed that and said that, well, that's not, it's not viable at this point because it's too ingrained into what's going on in traditional finance. So we have to regulate for interoperability. So I think that, what do you think as far as like regulations and like timeframes? I think that we might start seeing some regulations occur on more of a global scale, like prior to the next cycle, top maybe like 2025, 2024 timeframe from like the payment standpoint, at least.
Yeah, I think that's a good estimate. I think, like I said, though, I think, there could be some type of emergency regulations that come into place. I mean, the executive order push regulators to try to dig into crypto and everything. And like you're saying, they're not going to regulate from, parallel lines. It's going to be ingrained. So they're going to have to start doing this sooner rather than later, because it's ingrained with everything, and they can't have, financial stability be threatened, right? They have to be able to, ensure the markets that everything's safe. So if, the crypto markets are volatile to begin with, and like we saw with Luna, you have, billions of dollars being wiped out. You don't know who's exposed to that risk. So they really need to get the risk sooner rather than later. And those types of catalysts will add up. I'm already seeing a lot of, rhetoric coming out of politicians and bankers and everything talking about stablecoin regulation. So that stuff kind of pushes it to the front. So.
Yeah. And I mean, you and I both, I think we both believe that these markets, at least most markets, move in cycles if they're not being artificially, well, they're all manipulated, but they all still move in cycles. And crypto is so young and nascent that even at a $2.6 trillion market cap this cycle, I mean, I think you and I both believe that that's a drop in the bucket with where it goes eventually. And as the crypto market cycles continue, that 2.6 trillion could turn into 5 trillion or 6 or 7 trillion or 15 or 20 trillion down the line. As those market cycles continue and as these peaks start occurring, the systemic risk obviously grows, because as traditional markets are swallowed or ingrained into crypto and DLT, and as we see integration grow, the risk grows from the traditional sector as well, where if something happened with crypto, it could potentially tank everything as this market really develops and flushes out. So they have to get a handle on it.
Yeah, right. All right, 100%. And like just like like options on the Bitcoin trust too. Like what type of market cap is that? It's probably way up there, just all the equities and everything that they're legally allowed to do, right? So
Yep.
it might not be clear if they're legally allowed to hold crypto, but they certainly get into some of these other things, and if the markets become really volatile, that's a problem.
Yep. So I'll touch on this real quick. I mean, World Economic Forum, I put out a tweet yesterday. They don't allow people to comment underneath their posts on Twitter, which is just funny. But this came out, I believe, a day or two ago. And some of the verbiage in here was interesting to me, because you see this Globalization 5.0, which is entitled Reconnection, Physical and Virtual Integration. But then down below within implications, talking about blockchain. So technological leapfrogging and the adoption of new tech. For example, blockchain, artificial intelligence, fintech, educational tech, green tech, health tech have intensified across borders, facilitated by greater international alignment of national data policy regulations. That leapfrogging verbiage is really interesting to me. And I think paying attention to what the trends or where the trends are leading us to. And I think from a payment standpoint, we talk interoperability, we kind of see these CBDC aspects. And I think that we're going to really start seeing some mainstream rollouts, probably like 2025, maybe even late 2024. But then even extrapolating out, like we hear like the ESG and the green finance initiatives, and we like the carbon neutral or carbon negative. All of these things present an opportunity for people as far as when they're coming, because 2030, I think, is kind of that benchmark for that. But this is kind of about tying everybody in the same system, the leapfrogging verbiage, and you can see who actually sat on the panel of the G30 here. All these individuals and all these institutions work together, World Economic Forum, all these central banks. This is Augustin Carson sitting on the steering committee from the Bank for International Settlements, et cetera, et cetera. And, they use the XRP leapfrogging, slow and expensive correspondent banking thing within that. So I don't know if you have any points on like what we're seeing out of the World Economic Forum, if you just want to leave that go, because it's a narrative.
Well, yeah, we've certainly heard leapfrogging quite a few times. I've heard Augustin Carson's talk about it. I mean, if you're in a country that never had an efficient legacy system, it's really beneficial for your country to leapfrog the legacy system and kind of build your own off of this tech. And that's what we're seeing. The first movers right now are the developing countries, the emerging markets. Like China's never had legacy system, so they kind of just leapfrogged over it with central bank digital currency. So I think we're going to see a lot of more activity outside of the States, right? And that's going to push for the US to follow along. Yep.
Real quick, I wanted to touch base on this. I know that XLS20, essentially the updated, kind of what everybody's been waiting for on the XRP ledger for the NFTs. You can go into XRP scan and take a look at the amendments. Now, keep in mind here, These stay nays or no votes until the votes are changed to yes. So it doesn't mean that 31 people necessarily voted no. It just means that you might have 31 validators that just haven't voted yet. And by default, that is a no. So it'll be interesting to start watching this, looking at kind of the XRP ledger and the NFT initiatives. You see this kind of native built carbon credit NFTs within XLS20. I just wanted to touch on that real quick. I thought it was interesting. And then moving forward, like, we talk a lot about CBDCs, and I guess I'll just say this, like, I know, Darren, we know that CBDCs are coming. This is the Bank of Jamaica here, talking about CBDCs and the central banking organizations being the sole authority to issue CBDCs as legal tender. Can you maybe touch real quick on like the pros and cons of a CBDC? So pros from a tech standpoint and how that would, help efficiency mechanisms, but then cons maybe because doesn't necessarily, change or solve any of the problems that we see these banks just and governments consistently, going down the same path. So maybe
I mean, like, the digitization of everything offers a lot of economic activity to happen, right? You can build programmable money, you can make all these different use cases and build up the efficiency, take all the friction out of the system. So, that helps with economic activities as well as new innovations built on top of that. So like the Internet of Things and everything that's involved with what we see with, the convergences of technology. So that's the benefits of it. But this doesn't really stop bad monetary policy, and that's kind of what we've had, bad fiscal policy too. So we see it on both ends, and it just kind of enables them to go further with it, right? It's got a lot of use cases to help everything, but at the same time they can go further. Deep negative interest rates, meaning, I hold the dollar, tomorrow I have 99 cents, the next day 98 cents, and keep going down the line. Or, I mean, if they say, all right, well, we're going to give you interest on your CBDC, that would mean that they would have to start buying up assets to match their liabilities. So if they give out $1 trillion, now they need $1 trillion worth of assets to match it. And that's where they get into the markets and start buying, ETFs and start buying homes and treasuries. And, there's only so much treasuries they can buy, and then we'll just pump the markets that way. So, I mean, there's a lot of like different types of, and then surveillance too would be the really negative one that a lot of people already see coming. So a lot of people are fighting against that. I don't think it'll be as bad as people think it will be, but at the same time, I don't think it's going to be good either. People.
And I don't think fiscal policy measures are going to change for the positive. I mean, I think you and I even saw, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks ago, that the House Budgetary Committee put out a document saying that having a debt ceiling in place, did not enable them to pivot and make fiscal decisions. When they're the House Budgetary Committee that's supposed to be maintaining a budget, and they came out and said, we need to remove this debt ceiling because it doesn't enable us to make fiscal decisions, because they are unable at this point in time to manage the budget. It is a cascading snowball effect rolling downhill. I don't know who's going to solve it, and we'll see how it potentially comes crashing down. But one thing that the narrative has changed so much between all these banks and all these organizations, and I think you and I have probably witnessed that, because we like digging into kind of these like boring articles that these central banks come out with, and it really has shifted. You got the Bank of Japan right here saying, how to build a monetary system in the digital age. We weren't hearing that narrative 2 or 3 years ago. Everything was completely fine and kosher, right? And now they're, Bank for International Settlements saying that they have to completely rewrite the model. And DLT is certainly going to interoperate with that new model. And you've got Bank of Japan saying the same thing, how to build a monetary system in the digital age. So they're not going to, in my opinion, and maybe they do to some extent, I think that they rewrite the rule books to an extent here. I don't think that they can incorporate this tech into what exists currently. I mean, the Howey test is what, 80 or 90 years old, right? So the model's got to change, and it'll be really interesting to watch when it happens. So
Yeah, and that's why they're hinting at like a new Bretton Woods and everything, you know, they actually hint at what's coming with all this stuff. I mean, because they know as well as we do that it's unsustainable, that things can't happen this way. And like you're saying, the government's not going to stop spending money. None of that stuff's going to happen. So something's got to break. And then when it breaks, are they going to do the right thing, or are they going to just keep printing money? Because if they just keep printing money, they're going to have to just reset the system completely. But we will
Yeah,
find.
European Central Bank was sprinkling in some quantitative easing documents into their news publications like 3 or 4 days ago, and I was like, huh. Okay, so yeah, this came out, and this is acidine, I think, and it's just how much of a joke, how much of a show we're all kind of really watching right now. And this is Eleanor Tourette, Patrick Doody, the independent expert that the SEC retained to analyze the perspective of a reasonable purchaser of XRP, is currently employed by a private consulting firm that won a $4.1 million government contract in 2018. That contract was funded by the SEC. So the independent expert that the SEC has, you know, within this case, that's going to basically be giving his opinion on the standpoint of XRP holders when they purchased XRP, is actually, let me go forward to here, is an employee of Integra FEC. And Integra FEC, we can see here, December 28, 2018, was awarded this contract. Even outside of that, the craziest thing, and you talk about conflict of interest here, this is Patrick Doody as well. Again, he started this, he's the founder and managing director of an investment partnership, Lilypad Capital, founded in 2016 to make investments in the digital asset space, profitably allocated capital to many digital asset investments. And this same dude is literally giving his opinion from the stance of XRP holders as SEC witness and testimony, which I think is, I don't know what your opinions are on this, but it's pretty, it's absolutely ridiculous. Like you can see down here, and this is going to be very similar because Telegram was going to release their ton token. I was asked to review certain documents circulated by the defendants in this case, and give my opinion on certain matters, including the perspective of a reasonable purchaser of the digital tokens. And that's going to be the same narrative that we see for XRP. How can somebody give an opinion? How can somebody that's so incentivized or has conflicts of interest, obviously, give an opinion that is legitimate and as a neutral bystander? There's no way, right?
Yeah, it just demonstrates how corrupt the system is. You know, it's like everything that the SEC has been doing is just demonstrating just how bad it is. And then like on top of it, it's been like this for a very long time, and I think that's why they think they can get away with it, where nobody even cares, right? Because they've done it for so long. But I mean, now since XRP, I never paid attention to this stuff. Now I'm paying attention to it. It just really just sickens me, honestly. It's a corrupt system.
And I think the one thing that is occurring right now that is different than, you know, when organizations are traditionally under heat from the SEC is that, you know, Ripple is able to actually fight back. Most of the time when the SEC, you know, they'll tie companies up in litigation to the point where they'll literally either have to settle or they'll bankrupt themselves. And it's a little bit of a different animal right now because Ripple actually just didn't, you know, they called bullshit and they have the funding to back it up. So it's kind of a little bit of a different animal. And I don't know if the SEC at this point has bitten off more than they could chew. I think that they probably have to an extent, but it will be I won't be surprised, and I know you won't either way about what happens in this case, positive or negative, because we've seen some pretty crazy stuff over the past couple of years, and I don't think that we've seen the end of it yet. So,
well, like you're saying, I think the money to back Ripple, right? Like, look at Mary Jo White, right? She was the head of the SEC for so long. Like, to me, it's just a matter of when, not if. And that's why the SEC is delaying it so much, is because, you know, whatever Ripple's building is a problem to the incumbents, right? And there's regulatory capture where the SEC is working closely with the incumbents, and they are ordered to put a wrench in the works, and that's exactly what they're doing. But I don't see them, you know, actually succeeding. I think it's just going to be a time game.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's one of the things that's a little bit frustrating that you see across this space, regardless, where there's so many people that, um, and I could care less if you support Ripple or XRP personally, but for me, it's like just zoom out a little bit and look at the forest and look at this space and think about what happens if this court case goes in a direction that we don't want it to go in, and the watershed effects that are going to occur throughout the entire crypto space. Because a lot of cryptos have launched in models that are probably similar to what Ripple did. And at some point there is that decentralization, and some point you do have that kind of network removing itself from like the entity behind it. But a lot of organizations probably did similar style launches. And that's, I think, one of the things that John Deaton said is he's not fighting for, was XRP ever a security? He's fighting for the SEC stating that XRP has always been and is still a security at the time of the lawsuit, which is just nonsensical. And I think even now, more so than ever, you see all of the initiatives, you see people that are building on the XRPL, like it's a joke at this point in time, right? So it'll be interesting to watch how it plays out, certainly.
Yeah, and it's just you know, you see everybody that's building out on it. It just kind of shows you the lack of empathy for the retail investor, right? It's like they see how many people were invested, like they let it get this big before they objected. Right now, I could see them going after the small companies as they start and say, "No, you got to register with us," right? But they waited as long as they did, wait for as many investors, as many projects to build, and then they dropped the hammer. So it's another thing that just kind of shows motives. This is Lockheed and Martin. If you're not familiar, Lockheed and Martin provides like a lot of the military parts for the U.S. military that kind of like work hand in hand with the United States military. So Lockheed and Martin is the war machine, right? So they partnered with Filecoin with a proof of concept, and they showed this at Davos. And this is just decentralized Filecoin is decentralized data, right? So you're able to store your data in the cloud, not worried about it getting hacked or broken into. So Lockheed and Martin is working with Filecoin, and they're doing this for like space exploration. So if I was talking to a developer that said that's a really good use case for crypto and blockchain is actual. When you're in space, it takes a really long lag to reach the computers on Earth. So, seems pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's a big player too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Filecoin is something that I have to look into more in depth, because I know I've heard of how just large it is and all the connections that exist within Filecoin. Lockheed Martin's a giant, obviously, but yeah, I mean, IPFS. But I think we've seen so many just enterprises like adopting digital assets, and I kind of like always go back to kind of looking at the governing board of Hedera Hashgraph anytime I see kind of these big names involved. And I forget how many. I actually have a meeting with Christian Hasker Tuesday, I think. I'm interested to ask him, because I think it's like 38 or 39 governing board members in total once it's all flushed out. And right now, I think I want to say the low 20s or something like that. And we've seen some enterprise use cases. Like we've seen EFTPOS, which is the entire ACH system in Australia and New Zealand, do a proof of concept and then join the Hedera governing board. And then there's these documents that EFTPOS puts out like months later with a bunch of redacted statements, but Hedera Hashgraphs in the documents. And it's like, if they're doing it, there's incentive, obviously, because they own and operate the network. They're certainly testing out Hedera. And just like any of these other partnerships that we see, it's the amount that we've seen. I would imagine that it's got to be more than tenfold the amount that we haven't, probably way more than that, even with what's going on in this space and who's actually integrating and building. So,
well, the tech speaks for itself. It's like we talk about all the efficiencies and how much it makes sense. They realize that too, and they're leaning into it.
We were talking about Quant a little bit last night, about developer licenses and just banking organizations. And I forget what stat you gave, but it was like, 50,000, is it 50,000 annually to operate on Overledger?
Yeah, well, that's what I've read in a tweet. So yeah, I can't confirm that information, but I read in a tweet that it was 50,000 for a license to use the Overledger network, and that's in Quant. So they would have to pay $50,000 in the Quant token in order to get access to Overledger. So
yeah, and you start dealing with a multitude of banks. that can add up fairly quickly, right?
Well, also like if the price is low, they might load up on it too, so they don't have to pay it in the future either.
Is this the,
This is
oh,
the Egypt one that we looked at. It's right
oh
there.
yeah, yeah. Shoot. Hold on. Let me go back to it. Sorry. No, it was a ways down.
Yeah. Right. I think it was
Up
back.
here. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I mean, you kind of stumbled upon this, and maybe we headway into that. So if you want to touch on that, because I know that you shared that with me today. So
Yeah, so this is the National Bank of Egypt and Ripple signed a cooperation agreement, which contained more than 300 international banks, nearly 600 billion of market and institution share, wish to join RippleNet's network. This also involved the National Bank Remit Fund to set up new channels, as well as support and extend the remittances in the Gulf region and institutional liquidity management and Forex exchange. So I mean the Bank of Egypt, right, was the National Bank of Egypt rather was a couple of months ago, I believe, or maybe it was more like 6 months ago.
yeah,
But we didn't know that it seems like the remit, the bank remit fund is the National Bank Remit Fund is kind of like tapping into Egypt's national infrastructure, and it looks like Ripple is involved with that. So I mean, usually when I see a new jurisdiction getting added to either X current or ODL or something, that tells me a lot, because for any of these banks to join on, they need permission from the central bank in order to do it, which essentially is that government's allowing that to happen. So when we saw the National Bank of Egypt and Ripple sign a cooperation, we should have knew better. And here it is. They're going into the National Bank Remit Fund and setting up new channels. So
I think one of the other things that this alludes to that we talk about a lot is that historically these banks don't innovate, right? The SWIFT system doesn't innovate, right? So who's building out the infrastructure, the technology, who's helping to build out these rails? And I can only think of probably between 5 and 10, likely candidates that could be helping to do that thing, or build out rails and build out, kind of the tech infrastructure. So like, I think that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes, like we've talked about before, than we've even seen. And sometimes you get little snippets of like, just how big it really is, in my opinion. When you talk about like Ripple aiding in setting up new liquidity, this alludes new liquidity corridors to me, setting up new channels, right? How big is it really, and what's really going on behind the scenes? So yeah, kudos, man. It's a really good find, and I think we can segue maybe into this. The audio is really shitty in this, just to give you guys a heads up. But Darren, maybe explain a little bit about what's actually in this video here.
Yeah, so this was like at a bar at Davos, and this bald guy does a show, and he had Garlinghouse and asking Garlinghouse questions, and one of the questions led to Garlinghouse explaining he was at Davos a couple of years ago, which led him to the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, which we already knew, as well as the UAE, which we haven't known. So he says that the UAE was like suggesting to the banks in the UAE, look at Ripple's software. So that was something that we didn't know. We could, extrapolate just how many banks in the UAE were using RippleNet software, but I don't think there's many known UAE banks that are using Ripple software. So he kind of says it. It's on my channel. I'll also post the link of the original one. So I used like this AI program that try to take out everyone talking in the background, so it sounds choppy, but it's better on your ears than the original one. The original one's like you're at a bar or something listening to a bunch of people screaming while he's trying to talk. So maybe people can hear it better. But he does say Sama in the UAE. And
Yeah,
we also
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Darren.
we also know like Sam and the UAE are working on a CBDC project, that's Project Amber, which is also, like the Middle East bank setting up for cross-border payments. Now there's nothing that's ever said, Ripple, but Matthew Liny also showed a PDF that talked about Stellar and Ripple with the UAE as well as Salmon. So you just follow his account, you probably could find it.
Yeah, another good research topic that I think you and I have talked about is kind of really trying to dig into this National Bank Remit Fund through Egypt, because we looked real quick before this and didn't find a whole lot. But I'm sure if you dig in certain ways, you'll definitely be able to find this. And I think you and I will try to do that over the next week. Last but not least, Darren, you shared this with me today. This is coming out of the nation of Georgia. The economy minister meeting with the CEO of Ripple Labs. If you wanted to kind of go over this maybe for a second here.
Well, it's the whole MENA region, right? It's Egypt, the UAE, Saudi Arabia Monetary Authority. Now we see Garlinghouse meeting with the economic minister of Georgia. So it's looking like they're making a lot of traction in the MENA region. That's what they've said too. So hopefully they push up. Also, with all the economic problems that were happening and commodity prices skyrocketing, these countries right now are paying like super high prices. Some of these countries can't even get food, right? Their food costs are going out of control. Now, if they were able to take a lot of the frictions and make trade happen quicker through some of these technologies, that would be beneficial to the whole population. So I think, that's a strong motivator is hunger. If we start seeing some of these smaller nations in the MENA region start updating their technologies, it's because they're having a hard time, and these technologies will benefit them.
1,000%. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this video. We kind of went over a multitude of different topics here. Went over kind of all this, how propped up the central bank balance sheets are, and what potentially could happen when they start offloading some of these assets. And then kind of went through a myriad of different things as far as kind of what's going on with CBDCs across the board, and some interesting facts about Ripple in kind of the MENA region, Bank of Egypt looking at this national Remit fund. So yeah, I think it went well, Darren, as usual, pretty straightforward. And let's try to shoot for next week and do another one of these, right?
Yeah, it sounds good. If anyone has any suggestions, write them in the comments below. I'll try to read everything. But it was nice chatting with you, Solomon. Thanks, everyone.
You too, man. I will talk to you. We'll see you guys.